On February 20th, 2025, James and Kristin Brock, a devoted American couple from Carrollton, Georgia, were brutally murdered in their home, leaving the surviving family and community in shock. And without any leads on the identity of the killer, the case was going cold. But just when hope seemed lost, one of the most shocking and unexpected arrests in recent memory turned the case on its head. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the true, dark, and mysterious tales, then make sure to like this video and subscribe, as it really helps out a beginner YouTuber like myself. So without further ado, let's get into today's story. Sarah Grace Patrick. If you look at her photos online, she just looks like any other teenager. Cap and gown, big smile, a big future waiting for her. But sometimes, photos lie. And in this case, they lied in the most horrific way possible. In the early morning hours of February 20th, 2025, in Carrollton, Georgia, a 5-year-old Jaylee Brock woke up to a sound she had heard countless times before, a loud, high-pitched beeping echoing from her parents' bedroom. Now, this wasn't some random alarm clock or a microwave beep. This was her dad's heart monitor, a machine that literally kept James Brock alive, day in and day out. Jaylee, still in her little pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, did what most children would do and tiptoed down the hallway. She might have been thinking that she'd find her dad sitting up in bed and maybe her mom telling her to go back to sleep. But when she pushed that bedroom door open, her entire reality shattered. James and Kristin Brock were dead, shot and left to die right there in their own home. When the 5-year-old panicked and called the police, they immediately realized this wasn't some random break-in gone wrong. This wasn't a burglary, and it definitely wasn't an accident. There was no forced entry, nothing stolen, and no signs of a messy struggle. But James and Kristin had been shot multiple times. They had also been pistol whipped, the kind of rage-driven violence you don't see in random crimes. Whoever did this knew them, and they hated them enough to make it personal. At first, some family members even wondered if it could have been an overdose, but soon as they saw the scene, that theory fell apart. Now let's rewind, because to really understand this story, you need to know who James and Kristin were, and how this picture-perfect American family completely collapsed. James Brock's life had been marked by loss before. He didn't have a father growing up, and in 1999, he lost his only mother, Joanne. Then shortly after, he lost both of his brothers. Now that's enough pain to destroy most people, but James, he kept going. He became a father to 4 sons, 3 from one marriage and another son from his second marriage. He tried to build a family, and even when both of his marriages failed, he stayed involved in the lives of his children, even if it meant standing in the back row at school plays or showing up late to games. Then there was Kristin Brock. She was born in 1983 in Rome of Georgia. She too married young to a man named Daniel Patrick and had 2 children of her own, Sarah Grace and a brother. The marriage eventually ended as well, but Kristin didn't check out. She fought hard to raise her kids and kept moving forward. And finally in 2017, James and Kristin's paths finally crossed. 2 people, both bruised from life, found each other. But they shared more than just broken pasts. They shared a hunger to build something better. And in 2019, James and Kristin had a daughter of their own, Jaylee Ann Brock. She became their symbol of a new beginning. The living proof that maybe, just maybe, broken people can create something whole. But life wasn't done throwing punches at James and Kristin. In 2022, James's heart started failing. He went through surgery after surgery until at one point, it became so bad that the doctors had to implement a defibrillator. And for a little while, things seemed to be under control, until it wasn't again. His body started rejecting the defibrillator. Hence, the doctors decided to insert a catheter through his vein in his neck to drain the excess fluid and reduce strain on his heart. And in order to survive, he had to go through an LVAD surgery and eventually a heart transplant. When the surgical procedure was done, he had a machine that helped pump blood through his body, but that meant James had to carry his own battery packs everywhere. Literally, his life was hanging on wires. And Kristin stood by James through it all. Hospital rooms, nights of uncertainty, endless medical bills. She was with James through it all. After the LVAD surgery, James did well for a couple of months. Then in June of 2023, he started having problems where the heart did not pump blood to his left side, and he also did not make to the list of a heart transplant because he did not medically qualify. Doctors told him there was nothing they could do. They almost needed a miracle, and a miracle kind of did come, since they ended up not receiving the transplant, but despite that, kept on living and miraculously started getting better. And while all this, one thing was for sure, he was surrounded by loving and supportive people. James always kept positive and never lost his humor. This was a voicemail left by James to one of his children before his surgery.
I know you've probably seen that movie Ted with Mark Wahlberg, the teddy bear, and how at the end of it, it gets ripped apart, and they sew him back together, and then they pray for him to be, alive again. And in the morning when he wakes up and he talks to him, he's like, I just want to tell you that I love you for something. That way, in case I wake up after the surgery and I can't talk and I'm going, you already know what I'm trying to say. I love you, girl.
James was a brave man, but James and Kristin weren't perfect human beings. They still had issues. They both previously suffered from substance abuse, and so they had their troubles through their paths of sobriety. They even took their fights to social media, where they would post emotional messages. But despite all this, they always managed to find a way back to themselves. However, they did have a big argument in 2022, which caused Kristin to be arrested and charged with criminal damage to property and first-degree cruelty to children for allowing the child to witness family violence. It was later revealed that their latest daughter, Jaylee, was present in their heated argument and had to witness the chaos. And meanwhile all this is happening, Kristin's ex-husband Daniel Patrick, the father of Sarah Grace, was fighting for the custody of Sarah Grace and her brother. However, when Daniel's new marriage crumbled, Sarah and her brother ended up living full-time with Kristin and James. And now, as one big happy family together, they turned to faith, attending Catalyst Church in Carrollton. They got baptized and posted about it on social media. You know those classic family photos? Smiles, church outfits, captions like, God is good? Yes, those. Now everything seemed to be on its steady path. The family's all together in one big house. However, that's when tensions really started to boil. Sarah Grace Patrick was supposed to be the shining star. She was smart, on track to graduate early, a huge deal for her family since she was the first out of the family to graduate high school. Sarah was known as a sweet, caring girl, but she still had the occasional headbutts with her parents, Kristin and James. At age 15, Sarah started dating a boy named Jackson Spradlin. Now, if you googled bad news, his mugshot would probably pop up, and a mugshot he sure had. From drug manufacturing to weapon charges under the age of 18, this guy was a walking red flag parade. And of course, James and Kristin were not the biggest fans of their daughter's boyfriend. However, eventually, as most high school relationships go, they broke up. And by this point, the family has been through many rough patches. And while they definitely had a lot going on in their lives, from facing custody issues from past relationships to their continued path to sobriety, James and Kristin managed to stay on their healing journey through their dedicated commitment to the church. And despite all this, Sarah was actually really doing well in school. And in fact, she was on her way to graduate high school a year earlier. Everyone was rooting for her success. However, soon after her breakup with Jackson, Sarah didn't slow down. She started dating a much older man, and Kristin and James absolutely hated it. They profusely disapproved her boyfriend. They really started clamping down by enforcing curfews, grounding, and restrictions around her life to prevent her from seeing him. But Sarah didn't see this as tough love. She saw a cage. And she was supposed to graduate in May of 2025, finally escape and live her own life. But February came early. On that February morning, when Jaylee heard the beeping noise coming from her father's heart and discovered their bodies, police saw no forced entry, no valuables missing, and no gun to be found. Whoever did this weren't interested in their monetary possession. They wanted the people gone. So the question remained, why? Why would somebody try to murder such devoted, kind members of the community? And upon the murder, Sarah and Jaylee were separated immediately. Sarah went to live with her father, Daniel Patrick, and Jaylee went to her grandmother's house. And when the investigation was launched, they had no lead and nowhere to go. One of James's son, Jaden, thought it could have been an overdose since both of them had a history with drugs until they realized that his dad and stepmom had been brutally murdered. James and Kristin didn't even own a gun, which eliminated the option of self-infliction, and it seemed that whoever committed the murder also left marks on the victims being pistol whipped.
She went into the bedroom, and because she, I guess, assumed that My daughter Kristin would have been up by this time, and she went to wake her and she grabbed her hand, and she said her hand was ice cold, and looked a little further and realized that she was deceased. And she dialed 911.
People around James and Kristin claimed that the situation was incredibly bizarre. They were devoted and active members in their church, and James was waiting for a heart transplant. Nothing was missing from the house with no signs of break and entry. However, yet unconfirmed, neighbors around the house claimed that they heard 5 shots. However, this was not confirmed. And in due time, and on March 8th, funeral services were held in memory of James and Kristin Brock. Families and friends gathered, and still in shock, gathered in their beloved church to mourn their losses. And in it was their very own daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick, who gave a speech.
I just wanted to say goodbye to my mom and Jamie since we never got the chance to. I was so used to you guys always being here to the point that I never once thought to imagine y'all not being here. I didn't have a single clue how much I needed y'all until now. For James, thank you for all the life lessons you taught me and for being the best bonus dad ever. Your heart will finally be healed in heaven and neither of y'all will be in any pain anymore. Although that gives me so much comfort, your fight was not supposed to end there. Although there's nothing we can do to bring them back, we still have control over how we treat people with us today. Therefore, when someone tries to tell you anything, no matter how important it could be, just listen, because you never know when it's somebody's time to go. You could say goodnight and wake up a few hours just to find out they aren't there, despite their joy and their love. So just listen and never take a hug or anyone or anything for granted.
Sarah stood up, walked to the podium, and delivered an emotional eulogy of her parents. She called Kristin her mother her sunshine and apologized for every argument and promised to carry their memory for eternity. People cried, they hugged her, but some, they felt a weird energy. Shortly after the funeral, she turned to TikTok. She posted about missing her parents, her grief, how empty she felt, and captioned about missing home with the sad music overlays, the whole 9 yards.
He doesn't know it, but a year from now our family will be torn apart, and I will move far away and won't see or talk to him for 5 years.
In the weeks and months after the murders, Sarah Grace was very public with her feelings on social media. She posted regularly on TikTok, mourning the loss of James and Kristin.
She's not the Sarah that you guys know. You don't see the real Sarah.
Even requesting for the public's help to find the killer. She was completely devoted on trying to set the narrative online, painting herself as the ultimate survivor. Meanwhile, police pursued the case relentlessly, racing against time knowing that there's a killer in the loose. They were willing to incriminate every blade of grass to find these perpetrators. Even Daniel, Kristin's ex-husband, who eventually took custody of Sarah after James and Kristin's deaths, even posted on his social media demanding justice for the killings. And as time passed, and in May of 2025, Sarah went on to graduate just as planned from high school. And although it was a bittersweet moment for the family as Kristin and James could not be there for their daughter's graduation, it was still a celebratory moment and a beacon of hope as they had something to celebrate for the first time in months. She called it a bittersweet moment. Everyone watching probably thought, wow, she did it, even after all that tragedy. But behind the scenes, some people weren't buying the act. The police were not buying the act, not for a second. Now, shortly after the murders, when Sarah was questioned by the police, she allegedly told the police that she didn't hear a single thing that night. No gunshots, no screams. And remember that heart monitor that was beeping from James? Apparently, she claimed that she heard the beeping sound all night, but never went to her parents' room to check that everything was okay. The monitor that beeps when her father's heart is failing. Now, this monitor was also able to tell police the exact time of James's death, which confirmed that Sarah was indeed at home when he died. And on July 9th, 2025, the Carroll County Sheriff conducted a press conference and announced a major break in the case.
From the very moment the 911 call was received, a relentless investigation began, one that would span months, consume thousands of man-hours, and require the full weight of the local and federal law enforcement agency partnerships. Today, we can confirm that an arrest has been made in the case. Kristin Brock's 17-year-old daughter, Sarah Grace Patrick, has been taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault in connection with the deaths of her mother and her stepfather.
At what point did investigators begin to focus on her as the suspect?
So I believe in the beginning of any case, everyone's a suspect. I think I told many of you that when we were on scene that day. However, as an investigation continues and everything ebbs and flows, like I said in my press release, mountains of evidence has gotten us through here today. Lots of processing, lots of working with our law enforcement partners to get us to where we are today that honed in on her as a suspect.
They announced that they secured the warrants of Sarah Grace Patrick and her father Daniel Patrick, in which Sarah immediately turned herself in. Evidently, she was charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault. She reportedly walked into the sheriff's office calmly and voluntarily. No tears, no frantic breakdown, no why me dramatics, just strolled in like she's checking in to a dentist appointment. I mean, can you imagine that? This is the same girl who stood in front of hundreds at a funeral, sobbing, hugging everyone in the front row, telling them how much she missed her mom and dad that she allegedly murdered. The audacity is astonishing. She then takes a victim mentality and starts posing as a victim to her very own massacre. I want you to sit there and let that marinate for a minute. Now, when police took a peek at her messages on her phone, it turns out that Sarah was out here sliding into true crime YouTubers' DMs, basically pitching her parents' murder cases as if it were her new dropshipping brand.
Why would you ask me to cover a case where you are going to get arrested for taking your parents' lives?
She claimed that she wanted justice and wanted more eyeballs looking at the case. But a bunch of the creators later said that she seemed way more interested in getting featured than actually catching the so-called killer.
I heard about it on June 4th of this year when Sarah Grace herself reached out to me via TikTok Messenger, and she asked if I could cover the case of her parents who had been murdered and it was unsolved. I get requests like that a lot, so I agreed to do it and showed her compassion, and then yesterday happened.
What happened yesterday?
I learned that Sarah Grace herself, the one that requested that I make a video, was arrested for the murders of her parents, her mother and stepfather. She, was using terms like, oh, I think you should post about this because it will be a big story. And immediately I felt like, if I were 17 or 16 and my parents had been the victims of a brutal crime, I wouldn't be thinking about the views someone else could get off of that. She also started responding to other comments on my video. Someone asked what the mode of this crime was, and she answered with an emoji of what weapon was used. So that is now very haunting to look back on after this arrest.
Did you see any evidence at all that Sarah Grace might have been the person who killed her mother and stepfather?
Just as a layperson, knowing that there did not appear to be forced entry, that she claims she did not hear these gunshots, it did strike me as odd as I started researching it more, and I can't say, the more and more I read about it, I did have some questions. So when this arrest came out, I was still very shocked, but it made a bit of sense to me based on the crime scene and what I had heard about it.
I mean, being a killer is one thing and inexcusable itself. But what are we, friggin' stupid? You're gonna go on and tell other people to look into the murder that you allegedly committed. That is ignorance or idiocracy at its finest. Now the question of why still remains. Why did she allegedly murder her parents? No motive, no explanation of Daniel's exact involvement, no confirmation on other suspects, just a whole bunch of questions were left floating in the air. So of course, people started speculating, and family members started to talk. And one niece didn't hold back. Other relatives started dropping cryptic posts, hinting they never believed her tearful performances in the first place.
It was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I had my best friend with me, and we were just staring at each other the entire time. What is this voice that she's doing? That it sounds like crying. Sure, if you heard of an audio of it, sure, she's crying. But being front row at that funeral, she never shed a tear. She didn't stop. She didn't think about what she was saying. It was a scripted speech. I wouldn't call it a eulogy like people are calling it. It was a speech.
Then came the rumors that maybe James and Kristin were abusive toward their children behind closed doors. But family and close friends shut that theory down immediately. Strict? Sure. Abusive? No. And let's not forget about the murder weapon. No weapon was ever found at the scene. So it begs the obvious question. Where did it go? Where is the gun? Did someone help her hide it? We don't know. And poor Jay Lee. Just think about her. She was right there. Did she hear the shots? Did she recognize the sounds? Or did her brain just block all of it out so she could survive? Picture this. Sarah standing in front of the community, mascara running, voice shaking, apologizing over and over profusely. Then she hops online, posts carefully crafted crying videos, poses for selfies with captions like, "I miss you so much," racking up likes, sympathy comments, and virtual hugs. Then, she waltzes across that graduation stage, flashing a big "I did it" grin like she just won a reality show, not like she might have orchestrated the worst betrayal a family could imagine. How do you stand up there, hold that diploma, and know that in your gut that you're the only reason your parents aren't cheering in the crowd is because you allegedly made sure they wouldn't be there? And meanwhile, the real victim, Jay Lee, is left behind. A 5-year-old girl who is forced to build life from the ashes her own sister allegedly created. Sarah Grace Patrick was supposed to be the hope, the one who would break the cycle, the one who'd make the family proud. And instead, she allegedly decided to tear it all down, rip it apart from the inside out. She stood in that church. She called her mother sunshine, hugged grieving people who genuinely loved her family. But behind those tears, police say there was a cold-blooded killer playing the role of a lifetime. And as of now, the case is still ongoing, and no final motive was revealed.